I'm really glad that you all came out tonight. We have a special evening planned for you all. As you see, this man to my left, Zaheer Ali, someone that when I first saw him online, I really thought that we absolutely need to bring him to Syracuse. I forget what the video was, but I think if I remember correctly, he was on a mission sponsored by the State Department. I believe he was in Bahrain, if that makes sense. So I was listening to him, and I was like, I need to do whatever I can to get him here. Contacted him, and after months and months of going back and forward, he's finally here. So I'm really happy to actually see this event come to life, because it really does take a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of cooperation on both ends. So really thank you for bearing the cold and coming out tonight. We have a simple event planned. As you can see, the title of the event is Islam and the African American Experience. Zaheer Ali, he completed his undergrad studies at Harvard University. He is currently a doctoral student at Columbia University. I believe he should be completing his PhD this semester. So I'm sure he's excited about that. And you guys should be in for a treat tonight. Very simple. He'll give his presentation, and then we'll have a short Q&A afterwards. So I do encourage you to ask questions and to take advantage of this opportunity. Once again, thank you for coming, and hope you enjoy it.
Okay, all right, I just want to make sure that the mic is working. So again, thank you guys for showing up, and I apologize for the tardiness, but I will badmouth Delta Airlines for canceling their flight on me last minute and give props to JetBlue for rescuing me. So the way my presentation is going to be a historical overview of Islam and the African American experience, but it's not just going to be presented as a straight chronology. I'll do a little bit of time jumping to talk about how this history is memorialized in the culture. And you'll get a sense of what I mean as I proceed. So first I'd like to start with a few slides that I think document or showcase why this is a critical topic, or why this is an important topic. My references pull everything from historical archives to popular culture. So just be ready to be hit from wherever. First question, how many people watch Glee? Okay, all right. It was better the first season, but anyway, this is, in one of the episodes of Glee, one of the main characters, Rachel, who's this very obnoxious, overachiever type character. The episode was about the yearbook picture, and she wanted to be in as many yearbook pictures as possible, so she went out and joined all these clubs, because this was like a status thing for her, was to be in every yearbook picture. So they showed this kind of photo montage of pictures in the yearbook that she was in the different clubs. So here is the speech club, and I don't know if we can maybe dim the lights so you guys can see better. Are those controls here?
I think so.
Yeah.
Oh yes, they are. How's that? Okay. So here's her picture from the speech club, and you see her, wearing, I guess, speech club clothes. Here is the Mock United Nations Club, and she's, you guys are, can you guys see from where you're sitting? Okay. So here's the Mock United Nations Club, and here's the Muslim Students Club. And I thought this was a really interesting picture. Let me see if I can get this brighter. Okay, I can't. I thought this was a really interesting picture for representing the Muslim Students Club, because first of all, the other two students are African American. Secondly, three of them are wearing bow ties. And bow ties signify, or part of the uniform that's most commonly known as being part of the Nation of Islam. And it was really interesting to me that in the representation of Muslim students, that the show's creators would focus or find their most iconic representation of Muslim students identifying with the Nation of Islam and more generally African American Muslims. And so you know, throughout much of the representation of Islam in popular culture, this isn't the only example. I can draw on several others where African American Islam has been a key figurative representation of Islam in America. That doesn't translate into public policy. That's something maybe we can talk about in the Q&A. But in looking at Islam in the African American experience, I want to focus on the ways that Islam has functioned in the African American experience, and primarily looking at 4 ways. One, Islam as historical recovery. And I will explain what that is. The second is Islam as an alternative identity. The third, Islam as social justice. And fourth, Islam as religious tradition. And even though I have this fourth one as Islam as religious tradition, that isn't to suggest or imply that the first 3 aren't part of the religious tradition either. In fact, all 4 of these function together simultaneously. Sometimes one or more of these 4 is emphasized or at the forefront more than others. But these are the 4 key ways that Islam has functioned in the African American experience historically. So let's get to the first one. Islam as historical recovery. What I mean when I say Islam as historical recovery is referring to the ways people in the African American community have sought and identified Islam as a way to recover their own past. And what past is that? Well, first, there is the origins of Islam that has a strong African presence. One of the first key converts to the founding prophet Muhammad's community was a man named Bilal, who was an Ethiopian. And he went on to become the treasurer of the community. He also went on to become the person that gave the call to prayer, known as the Muaddin. And so he was one of the, at one point in time in Islam's history, he was 1/3 of the entire believing community, when there were only three Muslims, the Prophet, and Bilal and another companion. So this very key role of a man of African descent in Islam's early history is something that many African Americans who are Muslim identify with. But it doesn't stop there. The second kind of historical recovery is the role of Islam in West Africa. The long-standing history of Muslim civilizations like Mali and Songhai in West Africa that were thriving in the 12 and 1300s under leaders like Mansa Musa. Timbuktu, the center of learning, was built at this time and was one of the key centers of learning. And so many of those who were brought to the New World as slaves came from West Africa and identify with that civilization. And this brings us to slavery. There is no hard, fast way to count or to estimate how many of those brought to the New World as slaves were Muslim. But there are a few things we can say for sure. Some people say it's 10%, some people say it's 30%. One of the ways that this is difficult is because no one was taking religious census of the slaves. And many of the slaves who were Muslim, those enslaved who were Muslims, their captors didn't understand Islam and just considered their religion African, right? Or if they had names, they just considered them African names. And so it's been the job of historians to kind of go in and kind of re-examine. For example, one common name of a slave was Ben. And if you look through the manifests of ships or advertisements for slave sales or runaway slaves, you would see names like Ben. But Ben comes from the Arabic word ibn, which means son of. So there were many slaves who were something ibn something, and the slave owners heard Ben and called them Ben. So this kind of masking took place that has made it somewhat difficult to count. But what we do know is most of the slaves were taken from parts of West Africa that 40% of the slaves were taken from parts of West Africa that were majority Muslim. And so there was a significant Muslim population that was brought to the New World. Many of them settled in South America and the Caribbean because those were the first kind of dropping off points. Very few slaves were brought directly from Africa to what would become the United States. Most went to South America and the Caribbean, and there were significant Muslim populations, like in Brazil, in Bahia. The Muslims in Bahia led some of the slave revolts, so the maroon communities, prompting the governments to prohibit the importation of Muslim slaves because they proved to be troublesome in enslavement. But this, and this is where I kind of jump back and forth with popular culture. This fascination, this focus on historical recovery has been very prominent in popular black culture. And for this, I draw the example of Public Enemy. And this, I'm going to play an excerpt from a track. This is from their 1988 album, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, which is, I think, probably came out before most of you were born, but is one of the kind of key, iconic albums of what people consider the golden age of hip-hop. And, this is before Flavor of Love and that kind of sad Flavor Flav. But in this song opens with an excerpt of a sample of a lecture that kind of, and I'll let it play, kind of illustrates the concern over historical recovery.
You've forgotten that what we were brought here, we were robbed of our name, robbed of our language. We lost our religion, our culture, our God. And many of us, by the way we act, even lost our mind. Here it is, bam, and you say.
Okay, so that's the main concern. And one scholar of African American religion named Al Rabato is quoted as saying, "In the United States, the gods of Africa died." And what he means is, even though you had this strong religious presence initially, through suppression, through conversion, through the end of the importation of slaves, because every time a new generation or a new wave of people were brought to the New World, they kind of refreshed the memory of those who were there. And when that importation ended, that connection broke. And so a series of these occurrences caused the decline of the remembrance of Islam amongst those enslaved in America. But there were some things that survived, their names. I talked about Ben. Solomon was Suleiman. Ibrahim was Abraham. Bilali was Ben Ali. There were many slaves who survived, especially if you were to visit the seacoast islands off the coast of Georgia and the Carolinas. There were large populations of slaves because those plantations in the Sea Islands were primarily rice and indigo plantations, and the nature of slavery there was that those plantations featured upwards of 90 to 100 slaves. Maybe the slave master was often absentee and had another slave be the overseer. And so what happened is those communities developed a kind of autonomy, cultural autonomy, that you would not have found in the mainland. And so in those communities, the remembrance of Islam lasted much longer than anywhere else in the country. So names was one of the things that survived. Another thing that survived was music, and to this point I'm indebted to a scholar named Sylviane Diouf, who has been researching the connections between West African music and New World music, primarily blues, the relationship of the banjo to African music. And one of the things that she identified was